Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing Milk Removal, Understanding Pumping Curves and Suction Rhythms. We are thrilled to have you join us. Throughout the presentation, you can submit your text questions to our presenters by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. Feel free to send in your questions anytime. We will collect them and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. To maximize your webinar experience, you can participate using other toolbar panes, including handouts, chat, and polls. Your certificate of attendance, which includes continuing education credit, can be found by clicking on the Handouts section of the toolbar. If you experience any technical issues, please click on the Help button on the lower left of your screen. Please note, today's webinar is being recorded. After the event, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to view the recording. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Danielle Prime. Danielle completed her PhD in biochemistry in 2010 at the University of Western Australia under the guidance of Professor Peter Hartman and the Human Lactation Research Group. Her research focuses on understanding the basic physiology of human lactation, particularly the milk ejection patterns of mothers and the dynamics of milk removal with a breast pump. With peer-reviewed publications on pumping methodologies, breast shields, and principles for maintaining or increasing milk production, Danielle aims to provide clinicians and mothers with evidence-based practical knowledge. Danielle is a dedicated member of the Medela research team at Medela Ag. Her primary responsibilities include staying up to date with the latest advancements in human milk and lactation research and effectively communicating these insights. Thank you, Danielle, for joining us today.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic, which is surrounding optimizing milk removal and really digging deep into how the baby removes milk and how that's been translated into pumping curves. And so it's a topic that I find really interesting, and I am a little bit nerdy on the topic, but I hope that overall you'll have some new insights into the foundations of how pumping curves have been generated. And so I am a member of the Medela Medical Research Team, which is based in Switzerland. My role is to keep abreast of the latest research in human milk and lactation and to communicate that knowledge. And you'll see as we go through the presentation that some of the research that I'll be presenting is some of my own from my PhD, where we talk a lot about oxytocin and milk flow rates. And these, what I consider to be really fun topics. So overall today we want to cover three key areas. So I've broken this topic, which can be quite technical and complex, into three very simple themes. The first one is we're going to dig into rhythms and frequencies. So this is really just about the timing. So how and with what rhythm do babies use to remove milk, or not just remove milk, but actually to stimulate the breast. So we'll talk about the rhythms and frequencies that babies use and their roles in lactation. Once we've covered the timing, so once we've covered cycles per minute and frequency and rhythms, then we're going to zoom into how infants get milk out of the breast. So what kind of suck cycle does an infant use to remove milk? And that's going to be this, what I'm going to repeatedly use this term, nutritive suck cycle. And then finally, we'll cover how some of this research from the infant has been translated into a breast pump. And then overall, look at some practical tips and tricks as how you could perhaps work with mums to be able to support mum to get the most out of her breast pump. Okay, so the first topic is this rhythms or frequencies. So when I talk about this, I'm really talking about timing. So we have here a little graphic showing up of a trace of an infant sucking. And we're going to talk a lot today about these two types of sucking rhythms. This fast suck that is coming up here at the beginning and this slower suck that's occurring later in this trace. And these two different suck rhythms have very different roles for babies and ultimately for their mum's lactation. And human babies are very clever at figuring out which rhythm is needed for the breast in order to stimulate milk production. And so to start off, I wanted to go back into some of the lovely original literature that helped define this space when we talk about the science of infant sucking. And I want to talk about a study by Wolf, who in 1968 was really one of the first to report these two key suction rhythms used by infants. And so I have a direct quote here on the screen, but it's really simple. So basically what he was able to determine is that when a normal newborn infant goes to the breast, there are two distinct rhythms. There was a non-nutritive mode, and this is really characterized by fast or rapid sucking movements. So 2 sucks per second, okay? So that would equate to about 120 sucks per minute. So it's quite rapid. And then secondly, we have the nutritive mode, and this is slower. So basically, it's at the cycle frequency of around 1 suck per second. So the baby slows things down. And what's really important here is this distinguishing of non-nutritive, so not getting milk out, and nutritive, getting milk out. Faster and slower. Now, I'm sure that none of this on the slide is new for you as experts in the field. I'm sure you've heard this before, but we'll take it a layer deeper. And what I'm trying to do in the presentation is to remove this element of frequency from the equation so that we can then dig into the real detail of how we can extract milk from the breast. And so I've made a really simplified version here. On the left, I've got the non-nutritive, which is fast, rapid, and stimulatory cycle rhythms used by infants. And on the right, in the darker blue, I've got the nutritive, which is slow, extracting rhythms, really getting the milk out. And you can see there's some key differences between when they are used. On the left, the non-nutritive or the fast sucking rhythms are really predominantly used when there's no or little milk to be able to be removed. Okay, so the baby will apply these faster rhythms when he's not extracting milk. A key moment of this would be in those first days after birth when there's only colostrum available. And so you'll see babies using really prolonged periods of fast rhythms and then pausing. And then once milk has come in and we're in established lactation, we see a lot of this being deployed basically at the beginning of breastfeeds. So the baby will first go to the breast and suck in a fast rhythm in order to trigger milk ejection. So the contra of this on the right is the nutritive sucking, which is slow and extracting. And we see this predominantly for milk removal. So we don't see very much in the first few days after birth. We only see it once copious milk production has begun. And the majority of a breastfeed in established lactation is going to be applying this slower, extracting, nutritive cycles because it's getting milk out. And I'll put a little graphic up again. So on the left, we have that non-nutritive, which you can see here, Wolf nicely describes in his trace with a fast sucking rhythm. Now we have milk flow, and then we have the slower rhythm being applied here in order to get milk out. Now, I also want to fully acknowledge that this is highly simplistic, okay? So, of course, babies do not do one or the other. There is a continuous variation in response to flow. And to cover that, we'll look deeper into the third part of this presentation, where we'll really look within a feed at how this varies. But for the beginning of the presentation, we'll just focus on the idea of being faster rhythms and slower rhythms. And the babies are just super clever at varying that because they're able to coordinate their sucking, their swallowing, and their breathing. Okay, so if we zoom in now on the left, so we're going to focus just on non-nutritive for this little part of the presentation. With non-nutritive suction rhythms, we see them a lot in the first days after birth, as I mentioned. So we're going to zoom in now on these first days after birth, and then in a second part, we'll talk a little bit more about how they can trigger milk ejection. But let's focus first on that critical period directly after birth. So if we have a look, we have this period of time before milk comes in. And before milk comes in, we have little to no milk, and ultimately it's colostrum building up towards transitional milk. And so this initiation phase is a really, really critical phase. And the activity or the stimuli that is applied to the breast in these first days is really critical for programming future milk supply. So we know that if we have early and effective stimulation of the breast by that baby in those first days, he's able to take advantage of the prolactin surges that are occurring as the progesterone declines from the placenta removal. And we get this nice window of opportunity where the things we do here have a big impact later on future milk production. So what does the baby do in these first days? Well, he applies predominantly non-nutritive sucking rhythms. So he applies lots of fast cycles, and then he has pauses, and then another burst of fast cycles again. Now, why is the baby doing this? Well, there's little to no flow in these periods, so he's not responding to flow, and he doesn't have to deal with the coordination of swallowing like you have to do it in established lactation, or at least he doesn't have to do it to a very large degree. And so the baby's very clever at just applying an appropriate stimuli to the breast in order to say, okay, mum, I'm here, I'm healthy, and please produce milk for me in the future, and help the mum's breast transition from the secretory differentiation stage during pregnancy to the secretory activation phase afterwards, and ultimately get that milk to come in. And so the rhythm during initiation is lots and lots of these non-nutritive cycles, some pauses, and then brief periods of nutritive sucking in order to get that colostrum out. And those periods of nutritive sucking will transition and increase over time as milk comes in and the baby transitions more to predominantly nutritive sucking, or whenever milk is flowing, applying that nutritive sucking. Okay. So we've covered the first days after birth. So then now once milk comes in, the baby has to, at the beginning of a breastfeed, trigger milk to flow. And we all know this as milk ejection. So here, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that the baby needs to apply a specific stimulus to the breast in order to send the signal up the brainstem to the hypothalamus, posterior pituitary, and get that good oxytocin out, okay? The oxytocin is going to be released into the maternal circulation, into both breasts. We're going to have binding of the receptors, squeezing of the myoepithelial cells, and the ultimate ejection of milk for the baby to begin extracting the milk available from the breast. So this stimulus here is really important. And what the baby does in order to achieve that stimulus is to suckle initially in a non-nutritive rhythm. I'll show you a little image here. In this faster rhythm in order to trigger milk ejection. And they're really good at doing this, and they get this done within a minute of a breastfeed. But of course, the more the mum breastfeeds and gets used to her baby and his specific stimulus, the faster she responds to him. And then subsequent, once milk is flowing, you're going to start seeing those nutritive cycles, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the middle part of the presentation. Okay. So how have these non-nutritive suction rhythms been translated into breast pumps? Well, there's two key papers that I want to describe in the first part of the presentation. The first one is how the infant sucking rhythm, which has those irregular, higher frequency suckling with pauses, how those have been translated in the initiation phase. And then I'll talk a little bit about how the stimulatory fast sucking rhythm in established lactation has been translated as well, covering these two papers here. So if we zoom in first on the initiation phase, we'll talk about a paper by Professor Paula Meyer, in which they took the insights that were discovered by healthy term infants and how their sucking rhythms were recorded in the first days after birth, and wondered if they could translate that into a breast pump suction pattern that could mimic this behavior. And what they were able to find is when they applied a special sucking rhythm that was designed predominantly with non-nutritive suction patterns, and we see here in the graph, if I highlight these first days, the special non-nutritive suction rhythm is being applied in these first 4 days or up to 5 days, but predominantly really in days 1, 2, and 3 after birth before the milk comes in. And once the milk has come in, the mums move on into a standard pumping pattern. And that's what they use for the remainder of their lactation journey in this study, which was up to 14 days. Okay. Now, the group that's interesting as a control is the one that's in the dark black solid line. So these mums received no exposure to the special initiation suckling rhythm. They received only a standard pumping pattern for the entire time. And you can see that overall, the mums that did receive that special initiation suckling rhythm did a lot better long term. And so to show that in images, I want to kind of draw out what each of these groups was exposed to, okay? And so if we have a look here at the suction rhythms that were applied to the dashed group first, what you can see is, as I mentioned, in the first few days, they received a suction pattern on a breast pump that looked a little bit like this. So fast sucking rhythm, a different fast sucking rhythm, a slow one, just in case there was some milk to come out, a pause, and then another fast sucking rhythm, fast, pause, fast, fast, and a little bit of slow, fast. Okay, and so they're getting this for the first few days after birth. Then once milk comes in, they get it over to a standard breast pump pattern, which generally starts a little bit fast and then moves on to these nutritive kind of get milk out cycle rhythms. And this dark black line here, so this group, they received this intervention the whole way through. Okay, so the only difference between the dash group and the black solid group is the exposure to this increased amount of non-nutritive suction pattern in the first 3 days after birth. And this data has been replicated even last year, and I wanted to bring that forward because this was a nice paper that came out just last, actually now it's 25, isn't it? But so not quite last year, but 2023. And they had the same outcome. So another randomized control trial, in this case, the group that received the initiation style non-nutritive sucking curves were the dark black group. So the dark black group here received that in those first days and then received a normal biphasic pattern. And the control group is in hash. And so they received that normal standard pattern the entire time over those first 14 days. So you see this preserved increase in the milk production ability of these mums because of their exposure to a more baby-like non-nutritive suction rhythm in the first days, which is really interesting in terms of how this is working from that programming perspective. Okay, so that's the initiation phase complete. So now imagine the mum has her milk come in and now she's in established breastfeeding. And so the baby still continues to utilize these non-nutritive rapid suction rhythms, but now they have a different function. And the function that they have is to try to trigger milk to flow, to try to get milk ejection to occur. So here you can see what's ultimately the baby's trying to do is stimulate this cycle. Now, this study here by Kent did a really nice investigation into if a breast pump needs to start, what type of suction frequency should it apply in order to best mimic the baby. And what they were able to look at was a range of different cycle per minute frequencies. And I've simplified it a little bit here. But what's really interesting is there was a control group that had 45 cycles per minute. So that is what we consider to be a very slow one, right? That would be over in that nutritive bucket with the slower rhythm, a little bit closer to 1 per second, closer to the nutritive cycles. And then this group along the top, these 4 boxes here, these were all greater than 100 cycles per minute. So getting close to what Ulf was describing as the non-nutritive, so greater than 100 or 120 cycles per minute. And when the study team asked mums to rank these different suction rhythms as though they were more or less like their infant. So it's a really clever way of saying, please rate this, how similar to the infant are these different suction rhythms. And what was really clear is that all 4 of these that were greater than 100 cycles per minute were all rated more similar to the infant than any of those slow ones. So that's a really good confirmatory piece that the mum is really aware that the baby is using these fast sucking rhythms. And if we target greater than 100 cycles per minute, then the mums are feeling like these are similar to their baby. Now, why is this important? Well, remember, mums are easily conditioned to a stimulus, right? So if I go back and you remember I talked about how important this stimulus is. So if the babies are applying greater than 100 cycles per minute and the baby is feeding to mum, the mum's going to get really used to that stimuli. Now, when she tries out a breast pump, when she has an indication to do so, she may not respond so quickly to the breast pump because she's so used to responding to the fast sucking rhythm of her infant. So the closer the pump can be to feeling like the baby, the more simplistic that pathway is going to be for the mum to be able to respond to the pump. And vice versa as well, right? So say the mum's using a pump because she perhaps has a premature infant and she's pump dependent, and then she goes forward to ultimately breastfeed her baby. We want that baby's stimuli to be mimicked in the pump in order to have the mum be able to have a milk injection to her baby. And so that there demonstrates how they rated them. And then overall as well, those higher frequencies were a little bit better at getting milk ejection to occur than those lower frequencies, which took here on the y-axis is time. So it took a little bit longer for those slower frequencies to get that milk ejection to occur, which makes perfect sense because the mums are really conditioned to these faster cycles. So faster cycles at the start of a pump session are really good in order to match that infant experience. Okay. Now, in terms of from there, most pumps now have some form of two-phase technology. I think that's very generic now. And ultimately, if you're looking at pumps out there, you'll generally find that they'll have at least two modes. And I want to summarize it really simply to say that most pumps will be trying to offer some kind of trigger milk to flow mode. So here on the left, you've got a stimulation phase demonstrated with greater than 100 cycles per minute. The point is to trigger milk to flow. And then a get milk out mode, which will be a slower mode, maybe around 60 cycles per minute, in order to try to extract the milk effectively. And so that's how the established breastfeeding sucking rhythms have been translated over into pump technology. And I think almost every pump out there now has this type of translation. Okay, so in closing of this first part of the presentation, ultimately you can see that there are two distinct suction rhythms. We've got the non-nutritive and the nutritive. And of course, the infant will apply a continuous variation in response to their flow rate. When we'll cover that a little bit later. Non-nutritive sucking rhythms are greater than 100 cycles per minute, and they're really used predominantly during the initiation period, in those first days to program future milk supply, and at the beginning of a breastfeed in order to trigger milk ejection. And then we have the nutritive sucking rhythms, which are slower, around 60 sucks per minute, and are ultimately used for milk removal. And breast pumps have incorporated these rhythms into their technologies. There's initiation technology that's out there for those first days before milk comes in. And then there's the stimulation phases of general two-phase pumps, which are intended to trigger milk ejection. So now we will focus on slower nutritive suck rhythms and its role in milk removal. So we're going to leave all of the non-nutritive fast rhythms behind us now, and we won't really come back to that. We're going to zoom now into the anatomy of a nutritive suck cycle, okay? So now we really want to get the milk out. So we're making a big assumption at this point that milk is there. So we're going to focus now on mums where milk has come in, and we want to get the milk out. Okay, so we'll dig a little bit quickly into the science of infant sucking, and this is a little video here. But basically what we know from the clever babies that are out there is that the way that they get milk out is by applying a vacuum, which they build up in this intraoral cavity. We know that they apply a tongue motion in which when the tongue comes down, vacuum is high and milk flows. And when the tongue goes up, the nipple is compressed evenly along its length and milk flow slows down. And then there is lots of peristalsis of the tongue down here as it swallows the bolus. And if we were to take a little sensor and pop it in the intraoral cavity just there, we would see vacuum traces like this. And we're going to dig into the shape of the trace and what it means, and really explain this carefully now in this part of the presentation. So let's zoom into one of these nutritive suck cycles. And so here is one nutritive suck cycle from the view of the infant. And so it's really kind of a still image of what you just saw in the video prior. Excuse me. But basically here, if we start at the top, you can see that the tongue is in the up position. And as the tongue begins to come down, You can see that the milk ducts are now open. So they were already, the milk was in there, milk ejection is occurring. Milk wants to flow through the ducts, but the tongue is compressing them and allows the baby a bit of space so that he doesn't have to have constant flow. So the tongue comes down, the vacuum is generated, particularly in here. You see milk is being transferred into the oral cavity now, and then the tongue will come up. Those milk ducts begin to compress down, and we go back to point 1 all over again. So this here generates one of these sucking shapes up on the top. And if we take a look at some really nice data from a researcher named Anna Cunnan, she took tons of those ultrasound videos and analyzed the tongue up and the tongue down behavior. You can see here 3 ultrasound images representing the tongue up, the tongue down, and the tongue back up again. And she looked at one of those curves and she tried to estimate which parts of a nutritive sucking curve were contributing to getting milk out for the baby. And so what she was able to demonstrate is that one key area that was associated with increased amount of milk removed for the baby is when the baby was able to apply a nice fast rate of application of vacuum. So that's, I guess, a demonstration that his tongue movement is really fluid, I guess. So the tongue is coming down nice and smooth and vacuum can build up quickly. If that can happen, a faster buildup of vacuum was associated with more milk transfer by the baby. The peak vacuum is very important, and we'll cover that a lot in today's presentation. So the peak vacuum the baby reaches is associated with more milk output. So the peak vacuum and how long the baby can hold around at those higher vacuums is associated. And then the rate of release. And the rate of release is not associated with milk output because now the baby's just lifting up the tongue, stopping vacuum, restoring everything to do it all over again. So this part of the curve is associated, this part is associated, but this part is not. Okay. So if we break that down with a nice little graphic, I built this so we can really talk about the curve. So imagine there's a curve, and that would be the y-axis. And on the top here, we would say this is weak vacuum. And on the bottom down here, we would say that is strong vacuum. And so the pieces of the curve that are contributing to milk output are this quick buildup of vacuum, the peak vacuum, how long you can hold it around peak, so this kind of holding area, and finally, the gentle release is there, but it's not associated with milk output. Okay? And if we map out which part of the curve here is going to be helping us get more milk, if we can maximize this area here while maintaining comfort, then we're going to get the best outcomes for mum if we translate that into a pump. Now, before we go into the pump, I wanted to just kind of change gears a wee bit. When I was digging into the Wolf data from 1968, I found a second study, which I found just really fascinating. He was doing a ton of research with zoos, and he was able to take an artificial nipple into the zoo and measure sucking traces of just dozens of animals, which is really fascinating. There's toy poodles and Bengal tigers and all kinds of cool animals. And he's assessed the nutritive sucking rate and non-nutritive sucking behaviors as well of all of these mammals, which is just super interesting. So down here, you've got the baby, which is very similar to what I've been showing you throughout the presentation from his 1968 paper. This is his second 1968 paper, and you can see here a goat's nutritive sucking rhythm. So it also has this sharp pull and then this little hold and a release. This is a lion cub. So again, a hold and a release. Here's a calf. And so that has a really nice hold and release shape. And a baby orangutan, which has quite a nice long hold. So just a little sidebar because it's super interesting. But this is a highly conserved behavior in mammals. So when there's milk available, mammals are going to apply these slower shapes of nutritive suck cycles in order to optimize getting milk out. And I guess it makes sense because food is important, right? Okay, so the pumps. So now imagine taking that and trying to translate it into a pump. And so here is the results of a study that analyzed 6 different suction curves. And so these are the 6 curves here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you can see the first one has a more of a symmetrical shape. Okay, so that's one that was tested. Here you can see one that looks a little bit more like the one on the right, and we'll zoom in on that a little bit more. It also looks very similar to some of the ones on those mammalian animals on the former. Here you can see one that is differentiated because it has a really long hold. So actually the whole cycle is held for around 3 seconds duration. We have the same here, but a little bit different shape at the top end, again here. And then this one is kind of an opposite, a little bit of a negative control, I guess, to kind of demonstrate what would happen if the application slope was not super steep. And when the team assessed these 6 curves from a comfort and effectiveness perspective, what they found was that it was this one that had the best balance for comfort and efficiency. And they went further by testing this curve shape to show that this curve shape was able to remove a similar amount of milk or drain the breast to a similar degree as what the infant can. And so this curve here is basically demonstrating what we'll talk a lot about in the coming minutes of the presentation, this balance of comfort and efficiency. So we'll think about that comfort side from this optimized hold area. So you can see that these here, realistically, you can imagine more milk would come out with some of these curves because they're being held for such a long time. But what is really important is that this holding area, it needs to be long enough to be effective, but not too long to cause discomfort. Okay? And what the team found is that curves like this with these longer holds were really polarizing. So 50% of them got positive maternal responses, but that also means that 50% of them were really not liked by mums. They just felt too uncomfortable. And so this is the trade-off. There's opportunity for personalization, but there's a trade-off between you really need mums to feel comfortable when they're pumping, because comfort is also going to be a key driver of their milk output. If they feel pain or discomfort, then this is going to inhibit milk flow and is not the right solution for the mum. And so that's why this type of shape here appears to be the best benefit for the majority. Now, interestingly, I wanted to mention a year or so ago, there was the big viral TikTok manual breast pump hack that was going crazy. And as HCPs on this call, I'm sure you probably heard your mum say, "What is this about? What do I do with this?" But basically what the mums were doing with the manual pump, so with the manual pump, they're fully in control, right? And so they can push on the lever and hold that vacuum down for as long as they feel comfortable and then release it. And so what's really clear that mums are doing with this manual hack is applying curves that probably look like this with these longer holds, and they're able to hold them as long as they personally feel comfortable. And that is what's a real advantage of a manual pump, is the mum's fully in control and can manage her discomfort. Perhaps she can do these long holds for 1 minute of the session when she has the highest flow, and then she can back off when the flow reduces or when she's feeling any discomfort. So having mum fully in control does mean that they can do some of these fun things and personalize these vacuum curves. Okay, so the power of vacuum. So we mentioned a little bit in the former slide about peak vacuum. So I want to zoom in on peak vacuum now, because there's a lot of myths out there about the strength of vacuum. So what is clear is that the mum's maximum comfortable vacuum will enhance milk flow rate and yield, okay? But the word comfort is key here, and I'm going to repeat it over and over again, okay? So nutritive-like cycles, when you are trying to get milk out, absolutely peak vacuum plays a role in milk output, and mum should be as high as is comfortable. Non-nutritive-like cycles, like the part in the first section of the presentation, there's no association between peak vacuum and triggering milk ejection faster, for example. So it's less important. But once milk is flowing, peak vacuum is really important. And so maximum comfort vacuum is the highest vacuum that the mum finds comfortable. And we know that that will help her get out the most milk, because there's a nice study that demonstrates when mums use really weak vacuums. So this is just minus 75. It's super weak. It's like level 1 on a pump, maybe. They get very poor breast drainage, so 35% breast drainage. If they use a little bit higher, so they jump up to 125, which is still pretty low, they get a bit more. If they use 75% of their maximum comfortable vacuum, they get a bit more. And then if they go to their full max comfort vacuum, they get out a similar amount as the baby. Okay, so when pumping at a max comfort vacuum, more of the available milk is removed and we get better breast drainage. So yes, it is very important. But it's also really variable, okay? So the range of a mum's max comfort vacuum is really varied. You have some mums that can only tolerate down in this minus 50 to minus 90. So that's, again, the first couple of levels on the pump. They can't tolerate any more, and we should not push them to go higher. That is as high as they can go. And then we have a lot bundling around minus 190, 200. You see a lot of mums use that in the literature. And then we do have some that will utilize, really quite high vacuums. And what's important, there's two key parts here. One is that the level that they prefer can change over time. So if you're working with a mum in week 1, it's highly probable that she can go a little bit higher in week 2 and a bit higher in week 3 and then week 4. And then we see most mums stabilize after establishment, so after 1 month of birth. And the other is that this should also be clear when you're helping to advise mums about what pump to buy. It should be clear that not all mums need that most powerful pump. And so if there are, marketing slogans about like my pump goes to 320, mums will feel like I must get that because surely it's important. But we really are talking only a small percentage of mums that would really utilize those higher levels, not the majority. And so I think we need to just change that conversation a little bit and make mums feel okay if they're down in this lower range here, and that's acceptable, but they should be at their maximum comfortable vacuum. And a super, super duper powerful pump is really not necessary for the majority of mothers. Okay, so to summarize the peak vacuum, so it's a balance of comfort and efficiency. So higher peak vacs are associated with more milk in babies and in pumps, and the appropriate setting is the highest level that remains comfortable. So advise mums when they're in that slow get milk out mode setting to find their max comfort vacuum. And also advise them that it can increase over the first month postpartum and it will stabilize in established lactation. And in line with that, we should encourage mums to move away from default settings. So pumps will come with preset default settings, which are, a good starting point, but really mums need to be experimenting to find their individual setting. And I do hear mums say, oh, surely I'm at default. The pump knows what I'm meant to be on, right? And that's not the case. The mum should really find her individual setting. And then especially if pumps are coming more and more with these memory functions, we hear mums say, oh, I'm a level 6 mum. Like why do they think they're a level 6 mum? Maybe now they're a level 7 mum because it can change. So they need to keep checking in and making sure that they're at the appropriate level. And when selecting a pump, we can also advise mums that not all mums need the most powerful pump. Okay, so in conclusion of this second part of the presentation, we've covered that infants remove milk via nutritive suck cycles, that vacuum is essential for milk removal during nutritive sucking, and it's this quick build-up of vacuum, the peak vacuum, and the hold area of a nutritive cycle that are associated with milk removal. And we've also covered pump curve shape research, that how it's identified a balance of comfort and effectiveness, and that there is personalization possible, which will then be based on individual comfort and preference. So now we've covered the nutritive and non-nutritive, we'll dive into the last section, which is about how the user can get the most out of their pump. And this is like a little bit fun part for me because I want to talk about oxytocin. And this is a lot of the research that I covered or conducted in my PhD and subsequent years of just after my PhD, where we really were classifying mums' milk flow profiles. And so this is relevant for this presentation because it's not binary, right? The first milk flows, and then throughout a 15-minute session, you're going to have different periods of time when milk is flowing or not flowing. So we'll dig into that. So milk ejection occurs after around a minute of infant sucking or with stimulation from a breast pump. And we get that first milk ejection. So here we have time along the bottom. We have volume on the y-axis on this side and flow rate on the other side. But basically, if we track this along, we have no flow, no flow, no flow. Here's like a minute and a half. We have flow. And if we track this grey line, you can imagine these are jets of milk increasing. So you can imagine, I'll do the sound effects of psh, 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 as the milk jets really start to exit the nipple. And those jets are going to peak, and then they're going to slowly subside. And that's going to take about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And that would be one milk ejection. And then mums are going to have subsequent pulses of oxytocin and subsequent milk ejections. You can see here 1, 2, this is a third one, maybe a fourth and a fifth, okay? And what's really cool is that these flow patterns for different mums are really unique, and we'll dig into that now. So with all the mums we saw during the research, we could classify their flow patterns into one of these 4 candidates. So we have mums up here with, for example, pattern 1, in which they have 2 milk ejections, so 1 and 2. And they're also really done. So there's no more milk that comes out between 8 and 15 minutes. And then you might have mum in pattern 4. She has 11 milk ejections, 1 and then another one and another one and another one, another one. And the consequence for her is that milk just continues to flow the whole pumping session. It will just keep dripping, okay? And so we'll dig now a little bit into the consequences of that. Pattern 2 up here is very similar to pattern 1, but more milk ejections. You can see they're quite distinct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then pattern 3 has a similarity to 4, but you can't see where one milk ejection starts or the next one begins. But we'll go into the consequences of this. So the first consequence is about when we tell mums when to stop pumping or to stop feeding for that matter, right? And so on the left, you can see that this is one mum whose milk flow goes up really quickly and then slows down. She gets very little out in the last half of the pump session. And here's mum number 2, who achieves a similar volume of milk, but she just drips the whole time. So you can see that you can't advise mums or all mums that they'll be done in 8 minutes or that they have to go for 15 minutes because that's their unique milk profile that is going to dictate how their milk flow occurs. And I won't go into detail on the right here, but this is a nice little study on breastfeeding, and it just shows a very similar trajectory. So you have babies at the bottom and their milk flow rate of ingestion. And what's interesting here is that breast 1 and breast 2 of the same baby match. These 2 babies' breasts match, these 2 babies' breasts match, these 2 match as well, and these ones. So if you have a high flow or high transfer breast, your second breast is going to be the same. And the point here is that it's dictated by the maternal flow pattern and not by the infant and his ingestion rate. So the pump and the baby are responsive to milk flow. So if you have a slow feeder, it's the mum's pattern driving it. So some mums need to pump longer than others due to the differences in milk ejections. And that determines how often and how long milk flows. And the other very cool part of this is that if you get classified as one of these 4 patterns, then you're going to have that same pattern every single time you pump. So we tracked these mums across 12 months and we saw the pattern that a mum has is unique for her, and it's the same between her left and right breasts because it's going to respond at the same time. It's consistent throughout the whole lactation period. It's consistent whether the mum is pumping or breastfeeding, the same pattern. and also throughout consecutive lactations. So we published a case study of one lactation and a subsequent lactation, and we saw the same pattern of milk flow. So this is pretty cool. So what does it mean, though? It means that when you're pumping, we have to talk about individualizing and personalizing, okay? So in the very last part of the presentation, I just want to cover a few practical tips as to how to put all of what we've learned into practice and advise mum on how to get the most out of a pumping session. And the first one I want to mention is relax, but I want to be very specific here. So what we know can impact milk output is acute stress. Acute sudden sprite stress is inhibitory for milk transfer. And we know this because the people in the picture are Michael and Miles Newton from 1948. She was breastfeeding and he did very mean things to her while she was breastfeeding. So he put her feet in ice water. He gave her a little bit of pain, like yanking a toe. He made her do math questions and have an electric shock. And she transferred less milk to her baby when he distracted her with these mechanisms. But what they really taught us is that it's acute stress, sudden fright stress, adrenaline and oxytocin are not friends, and that's the challenge. So chronic stress and persistent stress and daily stress are not going to affect it. So we often hear, well, what about mums with in-bra pumps? Are they going to be able to, do all their jobs and pump? Do they need to be fully relaxed? And actually what we seem to be finding is that as long as it's not an acute stress, the mums do quite well with the in-bra pumps, even if they're moving around and doing some tasks. So relax to get the most out of the session, and then watch. So now we're talking about watching for those jets, right? So we've covered that before milk ejection occurs, there's only very little milk that's going to come out the breast, like 2.7 mLs on average. So we need to wait to see when the jets of milk happen so that we can switch. And many mums don't sense milk ejection. They don't get the tingles or the feelings. They really have to watch it in order to see. So once they see it, then they should switch. And why should they switch immediately into the slow mode? Because that first milk ejection is the strongest. It's going to release 36% of the total volume of the pumping session. And so as soon as there's milk flow, we go slow and we try to extract the milk. And then we need to adjust. So we've covered max comfort vacuum. So get the vacuum up to her max comfort level so we can get an effective milk outcome. And then what the mum can do throughout is just to ensure that she's in the right mode at the right time, okay? And there's one rule. If there's milk flow, go slow. If a pump out there has some kind of clever mixed mode that's promoting all these different cycling frequencies, or if the mum is switching back and forth between a stimulation and an expression mode, okay. But as soon as there is milk flow, then the principle lies that she should be in a slow expression mode. Nutritive cycle should be applied to get milk out the breast. Okay. So in summary of that section, we have mums in established lactation having a distinct pattern of milk ejections like a fingerprint. This pattern is consistent during pumping, breastfeeding, and subsequent lactations. And so you can see that it isn't that simple as just biphasic, nutritive and non-nutritive. It's going to change throughout a session based on her flow pattern. We should switch to a nutritive-like pumping pattern at milk ejection and aim to be in the right mode at the right time to optimize milk removal during each one of these milk ejections or milk flow events. And the pumping or feeding duration is driven by a maternal milk ejection pattern. So some mums are just going to need longer times to remove a similar volume of milk. Okay. And so to close the session, we've covered a lot. We've covered that there's two distinct suction rhythms, the non-nutritive faster and the nutritive slower, and the infants apply these in continuous variation in response to milk flow rate throughout the feed. We have nutritive suck cycles, which is where milk is effectively removed, and we should try to be in slow nutritive cycles whenever milk is flowing so we can optimize or mimic basically the baby behavior as he just naturally transitions between them. The key curve shape characteristics related to milk removal are the quick build-up of vacuum, peak vacuum, and that hold area. max comfort vacuum. So really encourage mums to increase that slow milk removal sucking rhythm to their maximum comfortable vacuum. There are unique milk ejection patterns, and it's difficult to define a pumping feeding duration because it's impacted by their milk flow. Okay, and with that, I'll say thank you very much and close the session. I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you. Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. It seems like our moderator can't be, I can't hear the moderator, so I don't know if anyone can hear me as well, but I'll just start to have a look at the questions and answer what I think I see. Let me just open up the panel. Okay, I do see a lot in here about flange sizing and about jets, so I'll try to cover that really briefly, but I think what I covered was the milk ejection profiles. So in the past, we have done some work on milk ejection profiles with different size shields, but they were larger shields because back then larger was better, right? Which we know is not necessarily the case today. We put sizes on mums that were up to 30, so very large, and we still saw the exact same milk ejection pattern, that fingerprint, with mums irrespective. I know that the team at UWA here have been doing some recent work that they presented at a breast last November. So they also see the similar patterns of milk flow irrespective of shield size. So I think that we need to consider the milk ejection profile pattern as being intrinsic to the mum, a fingerprint to the mum, a representation of her physiology, her oxytocin system and how it works, because we see it's the same when you're pumping or feeding, seemingly with different sizes, seemingly with different lactations. So I think we had 3 mums in that case series where the first lactation had the same milk flow pattern as the second lactation. So that seems to be not modifiable. It'd be great if we could perhaps to speed some mums up, but it seems to be intrinsic to her physiology. Now, when you have a milk ejection, can you get more milk out of it? Yeah, absolutely, right? And so that's that should then encompass all the key principles, right? So when milk is flowing, having the right size shield, having a shield that's really comfortable for the mum so that she can perhaps tolerate an even higher vacuum so that she can really optimize that nutritive cycle, being in a slower setting. And I think I saw a question there saying, should we change during pumping in terms of changing the cycle rate, for example, or changing a setting? And so I think I've covered the shields there. So the flow pattern seems really conserved. We can't change the pattern, but we can optimize how much milk we get out within the pattern the mum has. Okay, and shield sizing would absolutely be a part of that. In terms of changing during, and that's why I wanted to do that last third of the presentation, because for me what's really interesting is mums can be very passive and just let the pump do its thing, and that is fine. And if a mum is perhaps pumping once a day or twice a day, that's totally fine, right? The baby's going to moderate the rest of her milk supply. But if a mum is struggling to build supply, particularly in weeks 2, 3, 4, or if she is, wanting to boost her supply, then the tips and tricks that I described become really important. And so if she wants to be proactive in the pump session, then yes, that could be the advice you provide. When milk is flowing, mums can tolerate a higher max comfort vacuum, and we should be in a slower mode. When milk flow stops, so if she has one of those patterns which has periods of no flow, we can absolutely go to a setting that is a little bit faster, maybe more comfortable, turn the vacuum down a little bit. And I think what's important when it comes to max comfort vacuum, something I didn't mention actually, is that it can change during a pump session as well, right? So we often see mums have a higher tolerance, a higher max comfort vac at the beginning of the session as soon as milk flows. So not in the stimulation part, but during that period of milk flow, the breast can tolerate a higher vacuum, absolutely. But then when the milk flow rate reduces and milk's no longer being removed so well from the breast because the pattern's reducing, we start to see mums become a little bit more sensitive to vacuum and needing to turn it down during the session. And that's totally fine. But maybe keep that in mind, that if the mum says, okay, at the end of my session, I was level 5, so next session, I'm just going to use level 5, the best for her would actually be, what is your appropriate level at the beginning of flow? Maybe she's level 7, and then turn it down to a level 5 later, which I think is also why I'm a little bit skeptical of memory functions on pumps, because if they only remember that last setting, then we're not optimizing those first few minutes when 36% of the milk's going to come out. That's where I really want to optimize everything. We want the mum to be in the right size. We want her to be at the max comfort vacuum. We want her to be in the slow mode. We want all those things to be happening in those first few minutes of flow, because that's when we can really optimize how much milk we can get out during the session. Okay, I'll skip through.
I think, can you hear me now,
Hi.
Dr.
Yes.
Prime? Wonderful. We fixed that. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sorry about that trouble. So we'll go through and I'll help weed out some questions, because there were a lot that were similar you were able to just answer. So someone asked, what kind of wording would you use to provide education to a mother about how long to pump once she switches to the maintain setting?
Yeah, and it's really tricky, right? And I think I did see that question pop up earlier, and I hope I answered it somewhat in the third part, that it has to be really variable. The advice that you give to mum will need to be quite personalized. So depending on her milk flow pattern, then you need to kind of assess whether she's that mum that does finish early. And there are mums that are done in 8 minutes. There really are, and that's okay. That's just how her work, and she is best served to just pump again, frequently, and do that other 8 minutes all over again. And then there's other mums who are really going to need the solid 15, 20 minutes because you are continuing to get those drips. So frequency is always more important than how long a session lasts. So from a basic physiology perspective, pumping every 2 to 3 hours or more frequently is going to be better bang for your buck than pumping for a 30, 40, 50-minute pump session. And we do see a lot of mums doing these really long sessions, but they should not come at the compromise of frequency. Okay, so frequency would be the primary, and then within a pump session, really making sure to I know that Professor Paula Meyer would say pump until the last drip and wait a few minutes, but it really has to be personalized based on her milk flow pattern. So unfortunately, there's no fixed statement we can give. We need to work with the mums in a personalized way.
This is great, thank you. So someone asks, if a mom is having trouble getting letdowns with the pump, should she stay in the stimulation mode?
Yeah, so theoretically, yes, right? So we do, I mean, most pumps you can switch back to it in order to try to trigger that to occur, to continue some time to get that to trigger. What I will mention as well is that this can be just a transient problem. So the letdown reflex, this milk ejection profile, once it's kicked off, the periodicity of those pulses is going to be really conserved. But how you get it to be triggered, that stimulus that gets it triggered, is also really is very variable. And what I mean by that is it's conditioned. So in one of the studies I conducted where I tracked the mums for 3 sessions within 3 weeks, we saw that at the first session, on average, milk ejection wasn't occurring for, let's say, 1 minute 40 perhaps, but the next week it was already down at 1 minute 10, and by the next week it was under a minute. So even just within 3 weeks, 3 separate weeks, 3 separate pumping sessions in a weird lab environment, we saw the mums become more and more conditioned. So the more the mum exposes herself to the pump and those baby-like settings, the more likely her body should figure out that this is appropriate to respond to. Because the body's ultimately trying to conserve the milk, right? It's like, what is this? What's going on? Do I need to release the milk? This milk has been a big metabolic investment for my body to make. I need to be really sure that I'm releasing it to an appropriate source so that I don't waste the energy that I've, invested in producing the milk. Yeah. Hope that answers that question. But yes, the mums are free to switch back as soon as milk flows, she gets into the nutritive mode.
Wonderful. So a few slides before the end, someone is asking that there was a statement about both breasts experiencing the same amount of milk ejections. Can you elaborate a little more?
If I understand the question correctly, what I'm referring to is that oxytocin is systemic. So whether or not the baby is feeding on one breast, so my baby will be feeding on one breast unless you have twins. So if the baby is feeding on one breast and he's stimulating that cascade of the stimulus up to the brain and releasing oxytocin to the maternal milk blood supply, then that oxytocin is going to go to both breasts. And that's why you're going to see for some women that there's leakage on the other breast, on the concomitant breast, while breastfeeding on this breast, right? And so the milk ducts are going to, or the myoepithelial cells are going to be compressed and squeezed in both breasts, and in one breast the milk's going to go to the baby so the baby can extract it. On the other breast, the milk ducts will still expand, milk will still be pushed to the nipple. For some mums it will leak out, for some it won't, but that milk ejection will still be occurring in that second breast. And that is, I know we're a bit over time, but that's interesting in that one of the studies we conducted, I looked at double pumping, so pumping both at the same time, versus sequential, so pumping one breast for 15 minutes, switching to the other side, and the second breast for 15 minutes. Now, what we saw is that on that second breast was behaving from a milk flow perspective quite lethargic. So it was really a little bit inefficient. It took a long time. Milk flow was just really kind of just slower. The slope of the flow was slower. And what we put that down to is that second breast was still having all of those squeezes, was still trying to release the milk, but for 15 minutes we did not take advantage of all of those muscle contractions. And then we take the pump from one side to the other side, and now it's like, I've got to do that all over again. And now it tries really hard to squeeze the milk out, but it's just a little bit tired because myoepithelial cells are muscle cells, right? So yes, both breasts will respond, which is why double pumping is great, because you're taking advantage of that maternal oxytocin release, which is going to go to the other breast anyway and makes milk output more efficient.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question we have is, do both breasts yield the same amount of milk when pumping?
Oh, no. We almost every study that has a look at left and right milk production sees a difference between left and right breasts. There's no winner. Some studies show the left has more, the next study will show the right has more, but it's actually most uncommon to see the left and right breasts produce an equal amount. And that's from the baby perspective, and then that translates over to the pump. And I'll add to that of course they are different entities based on that insight, and they may have different sensitivities. And so you can imagine that the flow pattern, the periodicity will be the same, but the milk duct structures within that breast can be different. The composition of adipose tissue, intraglandular fat, that can all be different between breasts. And so you may see one breast respond better to certain interventions than the other, but the pattern is going to be the same, but how much you can get out per letdown could be different between the left and right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you tell us between different pump that are out there with brands, some have different cycle lengths. So how does that play a role here? Could you elaborate a little more?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different embodiments of the insights that I presented today. So, but ultimately it's the same principle. If there's flow, go slow. So if there's a cycle setting that is slower, get that mum into that slower setting when milk flow is occurring. And if it becomes uncomfortable, then feel free to shift her into the other direction, or into a faster setting if that's more comfortable for her when there's no flow. But yes, there are lots of different and confusing settings, to be honest, popping out. There's lots of something called mixed modes seems to be a common thing coming with a lot of pumps, especially in bras today. And a mixed mode seems to be literally a mixture of nutritive and non-nutritive. So maybe 2 big sucks and a couple of little sucks. And it's all, I can't say that for every pump because there's a different way for every pump. But I would caution the use of, again, when milk is flowing, go slow. I would not put any non-nutritive. I would not put any quick sucks when you're in the midst of a milk ejection and milk is flowing. I would not switch to a setting or a program offering that has fast sucking rhythms or any pauses during a period of milk flow. For the remainder, in between letdowns, mum can play with whatever she likes, but not during a milk ejection.
Okay, thank you. So someone asked, they've worked with some moms that just aren't able to get anything out with a pump, and they're wondering, is there any research behind this or evidence as to why?
Yeah, that's really tricky. We have seen them 1 or 2 during even some of my studies as well, and we don't really know why. We've tried to do different case series assessments of looking at their anatomy, looking at whether their milk duct structures are different, how large their ducts are. It is really tricky. It's fortunate it's a small percentage that are truly non-responders. For some women, for example, one mum had just exclusively breastfed for many months. So she was fully established in her milk supply and her lactation and her response of her body to her baby. And she had a really difficult time responding to a pump because she was so conditioned to her infant. And it took that mum around 2 weeks of just every day trying the pump. And by 2 weeks, she was able to have a letdown and respond to the pump. I can't say that that's going to work for everyone, but I would say if you feel like your patient has perhaps become really conditioned to that baby stimuli, and she's in established milk production, so after 1 month and things are really locked in and the breast is really working on autopilot at that stage, right? In the first weeks, the breast is more plastic and responsive. But then it could just be persistence. But that would be certainly a topic of research that we would love to uncover the root cause for that.
Great. Someone else asks, and we're going to stop taking new questions because we still have a few. We're over time, but we'll continue to ask the ones that are here. Someone asks, are in-bra wearable pumps jeopardizing maternal milk supply because of the inability to see milk flow?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we see 2 things though. We also see mums pumping for longer periods with these in-bras. So again, not all in-bra pumps are created equal. Some are coming with some very interesting curved shapes. I mean, some in-bra pumps are very inexpensive, and the software is very. There's just a real range out there, right? Some are very, very powerful, and some are very, very much not powerful. And for some, the peak vacuum, the max comfort vacuum, can be quite compromised for some of those devices as well. But we see those two things happening in parallel. Either mums are, it's easy and it's more comfortable to have it in the bra and to move around and you lose time, so you pump longer, or mums are having to pump longer in order to remove a similar amount of milk that they perhaps would have expected. I think it's important at this stage not to group all in-bras together, because the research now needs to tease apart, is it the pump? Are these pumps being produced equally? Do some of them have some deficiencies? Are some of them better than others? Versus the act of in-bra pumping itself. Because interestingly, from a physiological perspective and a milk ejection perspective, there is also, I'm not sure if you've perhaps seen it, but there's a kind of a hack out there of the sock trick. So if your mum is pumping with a normal bottle, there are some mums that will put a sock on the bottle and actually stop themselves from seeing the flow. And they feel like, and they say they get a lot better outcome because they're no longer focused on looking at the flow and stressing about the flow and waiting for every drop and being very kind of anxious about looking at the flow. And so putting the sock on the bottle and just letting time pass, and they look down, oh, I got milk, that's great. So my point there is that I think it's also very mum dependent, right? Some mums really, it would be just too stressful and not productive for her to be so focused on the flow and the work that I presented today. I would caution, just suggest that you really work with the mum and deem her level of investment in wanting to know these things, because it may create more questions than answers for some mums. But the tips and tricks that I provided are hopefully really useful for those mums that love to see everything. And for those mums, perhaps more of a traditional kit would absolutely be better for them if they really want to control and personalize and be involved in the feedback of their flow rate.
Great. Well, we have just one more question that we haven't answered. And so someone asks, when you say 36% of the available milk comes out during the first few minutes, is that the same when breastfeeding or just with pumping?
No, with breastfeeding as well. I think there was a graph that I showed earlier with the work from Woolridge with the baby curves of the infant ingestion. And so they stopped the feed at around 4 minutes to weigh the baby and quickly check how much the baby had taken. And there's a big chunk taken out in those first 4 minutes. So the reason that the first letdown is the most powerful is that fuller alveoli stretch the myoepithelial cells, which are wrapping around the alveoli like a basket-like mesh. And the more stretched they are, when you get that stimuli, the more powerful the squeeze is. And that's why that first letdown is really powerful. That's why we see those big, strong jets. And that's when we have the ability to access the most milk from the breast with a pump or with the baby. So yes, 36% the specific number, but circa 30-40%, yes, is definitely seen consistently between baby and pump.
Wonderful. And I apologize, I missed one question that we didn't answer. So someone asks, when working with NICU moms, she sees that moms develop certain patterns that they use with the breast pumps. And is it right to assume that babies will develop their own flow patterns once they're able to latch?
So baby's going to be responsive to the maternal milk flow. And we have no evidence to suggest exposure to the pump or the baby is going to impact the flow pattern the mum has, right? So NICU baby mum is going to have a flow pattern whether or not she has a NICU baby mum, is our current understanding. The reason being that the milk flow pattern, we haven't seen it change in subsequent pregnancies. And of course, those are different babies, different birth experiences. It seems to be really intrinsic to the maternal physiology and independent of, say, birth experience and NICU experience. So yes, the baby, once you get the milk to begin to flow and you have that periodic pattern of milk flow that the mum is hardwired to provide, then the baby would respond to that. I like to think of it more as the baby and the pump needing to be responsive to the maternal milk flow rather than us being able to modify the maternal milk flow, at least the timing of when those events occur. We can get more out per flow period, but we can't modify yet when those flow periods occur.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. And to everyone who joined us today and asked questions, we want to thank you, Dr. Prime, and for today's webinar, Optimizing Milk Removal, Understanding Pumping Curves and Suction Rhythms. Once we leave today's webinar, you will be redirected to a survey about today's webinar, and we appreciate that you take some time just to complete us, and we really value your feedback. You're also going to receive an email that will have a link for you to view today's webinar recording and the survey if you're unable to do it right after the event. So on behalf of Medila's Medical Affairs team and our presenter, we want to thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody
Thank
for
you.
attending. Goodbye.